Welcome to week 4 of Political Ideologies. This week we look at books 6 and 7 of the Republic by Plato. As we know, Plato was the son of a wealthy and noble family who was preparing for a career in politics when the trial and execution of Socrates changed the course of his life. He abandoned a career in politics and turned to philosophy, opening up a school on the outskirts of Athens that was dedicated to the search of wisdom begun by Socrates. The school, known as the Academy, was the first university in Western history, and it operated until it was closed by the Emperor Justinian in 529 AD. In Book 6 of the Republic, we see another dialogue between Socrates and Glaucon, Plato's brother. Plato's other brother, Adeimantus, also makes an appearance in this dialogue. Here, Plato takes on the important question that many of you addressed to different outcomes in your Week 1 Blackboard postings, namely, who should it be that rules? Should it be philosophers, the elites, the educated, or should it be the masses? The answer Socrates offers is that the one who should rule is the one best able to guard the laws and institutions of the state. In his opinion, the criteria for this position are pretty ambitious. This person must be able to see the absolute truth. Otherwise, the person, in essence, is blind. On page 3 of your readings, Socrates notes that he will seek pleasures of the soul rather than bodily pleasures. The person will not have a secret corner of illiberality. In other words, the ruler must not be narrow-minded. He must be broad-minded enough to be able to understand the positions of the many of his constituents. He cannot be a boaster, and he cannot be a coward. A ruler must take pleasure in learning, and he or she must be able to remember and retain what they learn. In other words, philosophers, in Socrates' opinion, clearly make better rulers than the masses. Adeimantus, Plato's other brother, then enters the dialogue and remarks, as Thrasymachus did in Book 1, on the challenges of the Socratic dialogue. He remarks that the conversation ends up going round and round. He then questions how in the world it is that philosophers can be the best leaders, when most people in government think, really, that philosophers are useless dreamers. In answer, we see Socrates offer up a parable, one of the most famous in the Republic, known as the ship of state. Here, Socrates compares governance of the city-state to commanding a naval vessel, and he ultimately argues that the only men that are fit to be captain of this vessel are going to be philosopher kings. This democracy for Plato, we should note, is not what we think of the modern mixed constitution democracy and republicanism, but it's a pure rule by what Plato terms the poor masses by way of the majority. Plato, in the parable of the ship, argues that the masses are going to be too busy fighting over what they consider to be the right way to steer the ship, to even listen to the true navigator, the philosopher king. Socrates, speaking for Plato, rhetorically asks, when the king arrives, will he not be called by them a prater, a stargazer, or a good-for-nothing? The ship of state metaphor is a cautionary tale, ultimately, against rule by anything other than an enlightened, benevolent monarch, even if the people themselves do not recognize what is good for them in a ruler. In the second reading of this week, we're introduced to what is perhaps Plato's most famous metaphor, the allegory of the cave. In the beginning of the allegory of the cave, Plato represents man's condition as being chained in a cave. This is a drawing, courtesy of WordPress, that renders what the cave might look like in Plato's allegory. Here, we see men chained in a cave with only a fire behind them. These men perceive the world only by watching the shadows that are reflected on the wall in front of them. They sit in darkness by this false light of the fire, and they don't realize that their existence is lacking. It is merely their existence. They don't know any other way to live, and they have no complaints. For those of you who've seen the film The Matrix, the allegory of the cave is often compared to the film, to living in the Matrix. People don't know they're in a false reality. They're just living their lives, for better or worse. Until Neo escapes the Matrix, he's not aware that he's being exposed to shadows at all, but thinks that reality is actually real. Plato next imagines in the allegory of the cave what would occur if one of these men were released from his bondage and led out into the actual world. He describes that some people in this situation would be scared, and they'd immediately want to return to the familiar dark existence of the cave. Others, however, have the capacity to finally look at the sun and see the world as it truly is. These people would then realize, through education, that their previous existence was a farce, it was a shadow of the truth, and they would come to understand that they had been deceived in their lives. A few of these people will come to embrace the sun, Socrates argues, and they will have a far better understanding of truth. These people are the ones that have the capacity to see the real truth and to be the philosopher kings he describes in Book 6. The duty of these people is not, however, to remain in the daylight. They need to return to the cave, Socrates argues, and to free other people from their bondage, to enlighten them about the true existence. Many of these people, of course, would refuse to acknowledge any truth beyond their current existence. The shadows seem real to the people in the cave. So the philosopher king returning to the cave faces a very great challenge indeed. Many people see this allegory of the cave as related to how Plato viewed Socrates' life. Socrates, as interpreted by Plato, spent his life trying to unchain other people by helping them to arrive at the truth. That he was sentenced to death ultimately suggests that telling someone the truth is not a very easy thing to do. We can see this allegory as an extended metaphor for the state of our human existence, and for the transformation that can occur through philosophical enlightenment or through education. When the sun shines on the freedman, this is an allegory for his enlightenment and his final perception of the truth. The concerns of the world as he viewed them previously are now seen as false, and he's eager to share his enlightenment with others. These elements continue to influence our Western thoughts. In fact, many things in our world can be seen as constructs meant to keep people enslaved. Something that people often analogize to the shadows in the cave is the media. It's easy to see Plato's rather simple allegory can continue to be reinterpreted and seen as relevant in the present day. I offer this week, in addition to the Republic, some readings on recent outbreaks of violence in town hall meetings regarding healthcare reform. I challenge you to think about how both Book 6 and Book 7 of Plato's work might apply to this current-day controversy. If one were to apply, for example, the parable of the ship to the town hall meetings, would these people who are yelling to the government that the government works for them and the government is tyrannical be akin to the masses that Socrates feared would revolt on the ship of state? Is Socrates, however, underestimating the value in what these so-called masses have to say regarding the political system? Is his theory that a philosopher king is necessary to show masses the way really a good one, or does it run counter to what we see as our liberal democratic ideals? What would your solution be in the case of the allegory of the cave, or in the case of a mutiny such as occurred on Plato's ship of state? Thanks very much for listening this week, and I look forward to speaking with you in week 5.